When HOA Karen saw my 8-year-old daughter Emma with her service dog at the community animal auction, she decided to teach us a lesson. She secretly placed a dog shock collar around Emma's neck and pressed the button. She had no idea I was the head of Juvenile Crimes Division. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more Karen stories. The spring air was crisp as I walked through Maplewood Heights, watching my 8-year-old daughter Emma skip ahead with her service dog, Buddy. Emma had been born with severe epilepsy, and Buddy wasn't just her companion, he was her lifeline. The golden retriever could sense her seizures minutes before they happened, giving us precious time to get her to safety. Emma's condition had been a challenge since birth. The doctors said her seizures were unpredictable and dangerous. We'd tried every medication, every treatment, but nothing worked consistently. That's when we learned about medical alert dogs. Buddy had cost us our entire savings, but seeing Emma's face light up when she met him made every penny worth it. For 3 years, Buddy had been Emma's constant guardian. He slept beside her bed, walked her to school, and never left her side during seizures. The bond between them was magical, something that went beyond training or commands. They understood each other in a way that brought tears to my eyes. We were heading to the community animal auction, an annual event where local families could adopt rescued pets. Emma loved animals, and though we couldn't take home another pet, she enjoyed meeting all the creatures waiting for their forever homes. It had become our Saturday tradition, something we both looked forward to each week. "Daddy, look how many dogs there are." Emma pointed excitedly at the rows of kennels set up in the community center parking lot. Her joy was infectious, making other families smile as she waved at each animal. Other children gathered around her, fascinated by Buddy's calm, professional demeanor. "Can we pet your dog?" a little boy asked shyly. "You have to ask Buddy first," Emma explained seriously, the way I'd taught her. "He's working, but sometimes he likes to say hello." Buddy's tail wagged slightly, his signal that he was relaxed and could accept gentle attention. The children giggled as they carefully stroked his golden fur, and Emma beamed with pride at sharing her special friend. That's when Margaret Wellington appeared. Margaret was the self-appointed queen of our HOA, a woman who treated every neighborhood rule like it was carved in stone by divine hands. She wore her HOA board president badge like a sheriff's star and carried a clipboard everywhere she went. At 62, she'd lived in Maplewood Heights for 30 years and considered herself the guardian of community standards. I'd dealt with Margaret before. She'd written us citations for everything from Christmas lights being up too late to Emma's bicycle being parked improperly in our own driveway. Each complaint was accompanied by lengthy emails about property values and community reputation. "Excuse me," Margaret's sharp voice cut through the cheerful atmosphere. "Dogs aren't allowed at community events without proper registration." The families around us fell silent. Children stepped back instinctively, sensing the tension. Emma's smile faded as she moved closer to Buddy, her small hand resting on his head. I turned to face her, keeping my voice calm. "This is Emma's service dog. He's legally allowed everywhere she goes." Margaret's eyes narrowed as she looked at Emma, who was quietly petting Buddy's head. The way she stared at my daughter, like she was some kind of problem to be solved, made my protective instincts flare. "I don't see any vest or official markings." Anyone can claim their pet is a service animal these days. It's becoming quite the epidemic, people abusing the system. The accusation hit like a slap. "Ma'am, service dogs aren't required to wear vests or special gear," I explained patiently, though my jaw was tightening. "Buddy is trained to detect Emma's epileptic seizures. He saves her life regularly." "Daddy," Emma whispered, tugging on my sleeve. "Is something wrong with Buddy?" "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart," I assured her, but Margaret's hostile presence was clearly upsetting her. Buddy sensed it too, positioning himself more protectively beside Emma. "I don't care what you claim," Margaret snapped, pulling out her phone. "The rules are clear. No pets at community events. Period. I'm calling animal control." Emma looked up at us with confused, frightened eyes. "Daddy, why is the lady angry at Buddy? What did we do wrong?" "She's not angry at you, sweetheart," I said softly, though my jaw was clenching. She just doesn't understand how special Buddy is. Margaret overheard and laughed coldly. Oh, I understand perfectly. You people always find excuses to break the rules. You think having a sick child gives you special privileges? Well, not on my watch. The crowd around us was growing uncomfortable. Other parents were pulling their children away, not wanting to be part of whatever was escalating. I could see the confusion and hurt in Emma's eyes as people distanced themselves from us. Ma'am, my daughter has a serious medical condition, I said, trying to keep my voice level. This dog isn't a pet, he's medical equipment. He's saved Emma's life more times than I can count. Convenient story, Margaret sneered. I've seen this scam before. People get their pets certified online with fake papers. The real disabled people suffer because of frauds like you. Before I could respond, Margaret reached into her oversized purse and pulled out what looked like a small remote control. The device in her hand made my blood run cold. It was a shock collar controller. Margaret, what are you doing? I demanded, stepping protectively in front of Emma. Teaching you people a lesson about following rules, she snarled, holding up the device. I borrowed this from my neighbor. These dog collars work perfectly on disobedient children too. My blood turned to ice as I realized what she meant. During the chaos of setting up, Margaret must have somehow managed to attach a shock collar around Emma's neck, disguised it to look like a regular necklace. I'd been so focused on greeting other families that I hadn't noticed the unfamiliar collar around my daughter's delicate neck. Margaret, that's around her neck. You could kill her. I shouted, lunging toward her, but it was too late. Maybe this will teach her some respect, Margaret sneered and pressed the button. The effect was immediate and horrific. Emma's small body convulsed as electricity shot through the collar around her neck. She screamed in agony, a sound that will haunt me forever, her 8-year-old body shaking uncontrollably, her hands clawing at her throat as the electric current coursed through her neck. Emma! I caught her as she collapsed, her little body trembling from both the electrical shock and the terror. The pain and trauma around her neck triggered exactly what we'd worked so hard to prevent. A severe epileptic seizure began on top of the shock trauma. Buddy barked frantically, trying to get to Emma, sensing her distress but unable to help as she convulsed in my arms from both the electric shock around her throat and the seizure it had triggered. Emma! I dropped to my knees, trying to cushion her head as the seizure racked her small frame. Around us, the crowd gasped and several people started calling 911. Emma's body shook violently, foam appearing at the corners of her mouth. Margaret stood frozen, the controller still in her hand, finally understanding the magnitude of her actions. The color drained from her face as she watched Emma writhing in pain from the electric shock around her neck and convulsing from the seizure it had triggered. You just electrocuted my 8-year-old daughter around her neck, I said, my voice deadly quiet as I held Emma, trying to carefully remove the shock collar from around her throat while checking her airway. You put a dog shock collar on a disabled child's neck. I didn't. Margaret stammered, but the words died in her throat. She's been seizure-free for 6 months, I continued, my voice shaking with rage and fear. 6 months of normal childhood because of that dog you just tortured. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. As they worked on Emma, starting in 4 and administering anti-seizure medication, they found electrical burn marks around her neck where the shock collar had made contact. The burns were severe, the delicate skin of her throat was red and blistered. I made sure Margaret saw every tear on my daughter's face, every moment of her suffering from both the electrical burns around her neck and the seizure. The combined trauma had lasted over 5 minutes, dangerously long. Buddy, despite his own trauma from the shock, crawled over to Emma's stretcher. The paramedics initially tried to move him, but I explained his role. They allowed him to ride in the ambulance, where he pressed his nose against Emma's hand the entire trip to the hospital. I didn't know the collar would hurt her so badly. Margaret finally managed to say as they loaded Emma into the ambulance, the shock collar evidence bag in the paramedics' hands. You put a dog shock collar around an 8-year-old's neck, I replied, my prosecutor instincts kicking in even through my terror. You treated my daughter like an animal to be trained. At the hospital, Emma stabilized after what felt like the longest night of my life. The seizure had been severe, but the electrical burns around her neck were even more serious, the kind that could leave permanent scars and possibly affect her breathing. As she slept in the ICU, I sat beside her bed, staring at the bandages wrapped around her delicate throat. Buddy lay beside her bed, refusing to leave her side, somehow knowing she needed him more than ever. That's when I made my decision. I pulled out my phone and called my partner at the DA's office. "Mike, I need a favor. I want you to run a background check on Margaret Wellington, HOA president at Maplewood Heights." "Rodriguez, it's 2 a.m. What's going on?" I told him everything. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. "Jesus, Danny. How's Emma?" "She'll recover. But Margaret Wellington won't." The next morning, I walked into my office at the district attorney's building with a new sense of purpose. As head of the Juvenile Crimes Division, I'd seen too many cases where adults harmed children through negligence, cruelty, or just plain stupidity. But this was personal. My assistant, Maria, looked up as I entered. "Detective Rodriguez, how's Emma?" I heard what happened. "She's going to be okay," I said, settling behind my desk. "But Margaret Wellington isn't." I spent the next week building an airtight case. What Margaret had done wasn't just cruel, it was criminal on multiple levels. First, she had illegally placed a shock collar designed for dogs around a minor child's neck, which violated multiple federal laws protecting children from assault and battery. Second, her actions had directly caused severe harm to a disabled child through both electrical assault to the throat and triggering a life-threatening seizure. Third, she had committed aggravated child abuse and endangered Emma's life through deliberate cruelty using a dangerous weapon around her neck. The evidence was overwhelming. The animal auction had security cameras that captured everything. Multiple witnesses gave statements. The hospital documented both the severe electrical burns around Emma's neck and the life-threatening seizure Margaret had triggered. The dog shock collar itself was evidence of premeditated assault on a child with a dangerous weapon. But I wanted more than just criminal charges. I wanted Margaret to understand the full weight of her actions. I called an emergency HOA board meeting. Margaret strutted into the community center conference room like she owned the place, her usual clipboard and attitude intact. The other board members looked uncomfortable. Word had spread about what happened at the animal auction. "I don't know why we're having this emergency meeting," Margaret announced. "The girl is fine, and I was just enforcing community standards. Someone had to take action." "Actually, Margaret," I said, standing up from where I'd been sitting quietly in the back, "Emma isn't fine. She spent 3 days in the hospital. And you weren't enforcing anything, you were committing multiple felonies." Margaret's face went pale as she recognized me. You can't be here. This is a private board meeting." "Oh, but I can," I smiled coldly. "You see, I'm here in my official capacity as head of the Juvenile Crimes Division for the District Attorney's Office. And I have some papers for you." I handed her the warrant. "Margaret Wellington, you're under arrest for aggravated assault and battery on a minor, child endangerment, aggravated child abuse, and assault with a dangerous weapon." The room erupted. Board members gasped. Margaret's clipboard clattered to the floor. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked. "I was protecting the community. That dog was dangerous." "You put a dog shock collar around an 8-year-old disabled child's neck," I said evenly. "You caused electrical burns to her throat and a seizure that could have killed her. You call that protection?" As the officers I'd called escorted Margaret out in handcuffs, she kept screaming about her rights, about community standards, about how this was all a misunderstanding. But the real justice came 3 months later. The trial was swift. The evidence was undeniable. The security footage showed everything clearly. The jury took less than 2 hours to find Margaret guilty on all counts. During the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. Emma sat beside me, Buddy at her feet, both of them healthy and strong again. The scars around Emma's neck had faded but were still visible. thin lines around her throat that served as a permanent reminder of Margaret's cruelty. "Your Honor," I began, "Margaret Wellington saw a disabled child and decided to punish her by putting a dog shock collar around her neck, treating an 8-year-old human being like an animal to be trained. She chose to electrocute a child's throat rather than show basic human compassion." I looked directly at Margaret. "But Emma taught me something about justice. Real justice isn't about revenge, it's about making sure this never happens to another child." The judge sentenced Margaret to 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, community service at an animal shelter, and mandatory sensitivity training about disabilities. But the sweetest justice came from the community itself. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Margaret from all positions. They established the Emma and Buddy Fund to help other families with service animals. The annual animal auction was renamed the Buddy Memorial Adoption Fair in honor of service animals everywhere. 6 months later, Emma and I returned to that same community center for the renamed adoption fair. Emma had recovered completely, and Buddy was back to his happy, protective self. "Daddy," Emma said as we watched families finding their new pets, "I'm glad the mean lady learned to be nicer." I smiled at my daughter's innocent faith in redemption. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." As we walked home, I thought about justice, compassion, and the power of standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Margaret had learned that actions have consequences, but more importantly, our community had learned to protect its most vulnerable members. Sometimes the best revenge is simply ensuring that cruelty never goes unanswered, and that kindness always wins in the end. Emma skipped ahead with Buddy at her side, both of them safe, happy, and protected by a community that finally understood what really mattered, not rules written on paper, but the unwritten rule of human decency. And that's a lesson worth fighting for, every single time.